When I resigned from teaching and decided to focus on building HG Couture full time, I thought that was the difficult part of the decision, but I was wrong. I'd made a couple of sales running my business as side hustle, and so it gave me some kind of momentum. But that was only the beginning of seeing difficulty in business. Building a business from scratch comes to the reality that many people do not see. In the beginning, there was no showroom, there was no established workspace, there was no capital backing the business. There was only a vision, a growing conviction, and a willingness to do one step at a time. The first challenge was getting customers to trust a young brand, because when you're just starting out, people are not just buying clothes, they are buying your ability to deliver. And trust is not built overnight. It is earned through consistency, excellence, and showing up repeatedly. There were seasons we made mistakes. There were times we worked with tailors who didn't meet the standard we required. There were times customers demanded for a refund, and that was the only responsible thing to do. There were times we made losses, because of inadequate market research, poor costing, and we later learned from decisions. But those experiences were not wasted. It taught me that building a fashion brand was more than just having creativity. It required you understanding your numbers, hiring the right manpower, understanding systems, yes, and a lot more business processes. Even visibility was a challenge. I remember when I became intentional about branding and showing up online. I didn't even have a good gadget, to take pictures of my work and create quality content. I remember I used to borrow a friend's phone to take pictures and make content. Meanwhile, before I went into full production of my own brand outfit, I'd gained experience selling other people's own. There was this friend of mine whose clothes I was selling, more like an affiliate marketing kind of business. I get his clothes, his shirts, and then take to other boutiques to market. And so that season opened me up to connecting with boutique owners, and I started selling, his clothes. So that relationship became a stepping stone for my business. When I started making my own designs, I would go borrow his office space, and his phone, and then take pictures of my works in his office, and then also started posting from there. And eventually, when a colleague of mine, whom resigned later after I did, started her own boutique, I do go to her office, borrow her mannequins, and started taking pictures with mannequins of my outfits. So it was a really long process of borrowing phones, borrowing mannequins, borrowing offices, just to get good pictures that can show excellent work. There is this common saying that when the desirable is not available, the available becomes desirable. Looking back reminds me that when building towards what you desire, you have to just make use of what is available. Meanwhile, at that time, I wasn't producing in our current workshop because our tailors work remotely, and so we had to take everything out. And then someone came interested in working with me, right? I told him I didn't have a sewing machine, and then he had one, so he had to come over with one. And eventually, when he was about to leave the city, he couldn't live with the machine, and then I had to buy that machine over. So it became our very first sewing machine, actually a manual machine. Later, another opportunity came. Someone was going to sell his electric machine, and I had no dime on me at the time. So I had to reach out to a family member and borrowed 100K. So that was more like a deposit for that electric machine. I got the machine. The person needed the money to solve a problem, an urgent problem. And so gradually, I funded my family member and paid the person off. And so that became my second machine, an electric machine. Step by step, what seemed impossible began to take shape. The machines increased, our team grew, and some of my customers, good customers who saw what I was building, became interested and actually did invest. Yes, they did invest. And then we set up our workshop and the showroom. We started building trust. One customer referred another customer, and slowly the brand that existed mainly as a vision became a real structure, and people began to identify with it even as a trustworthy brand. But beyond building the business, I came to understand that running the business, managing people, operations, managing yourself, it was really a lot. And especially in Nigeria, the complexities of entrepreneurship here, power challenges, sourcing fabric, materials, quality materials, and all of these things made it a bit difficult. But every challenge has forced us to improve, and we are still improving. When people look at our brand today, HG Couture, they are seeing the finished work, they're seeing the showroom, they're seeing, the collections, they're seeing the excellence, and we'll do more, right? And they're just seeing years of learning, adapting, making mistakes, and refusing to quit. The truth is, great brands are not built in comfort. They are built in the moment when nobody's watching, They are built when you have to borrow resources before you can own them. They are built when you have to solve problems before you have systems running. They are built when the vision is bigger than the resources available. And that is the story of the earlier days of HD Couture, a story of faith, resilience, learning, and growth. Because every masterpiece or any good work out there often has a tough story behind it. As our mantra, transformation begins with identity, and identity shows in how you show up.